Colorado's budget is $1 billion short. This is the part that you might be saying, wait, didn't lawmakers just balance the last budget that was also $1 billion short? Yes, and now they're short another billion. Marshall Zellender explains.
The state of Colorado is again short on money, but not jokes.
And then we're also streaming live on all social media platforms, mostly MySpace.
Top lawmakers met at the Capitol today to hear from the budget teams on how much the state is short after Congress passed and President Trump signed H.R. 1, the big, beautiful bill.
We forecast that this will result in a $1.2 billion loss in revenue in the current fiscal year.
According to State Budget Director Mark Ferrandino, the state will see $1 billion fewer dollars in tax revenue because of changes in Washington that lower individual income tax payments and allow expanded tax deductions for corporations. For instance, corporations will be able to write off research and development expenses from the last 4 years.
They get to write that all off this year. And that's going to cost the state of Colorado roughly $200 to $300 million of lost revenue.
Colorado's piggy bank, the reserve, has about $2.3 billion in it.
Using some of this and solving some of this through the reserve is likely a responsible way to move forward. But solving it all through the reserve would not make sense.
The reserve is supposed to be if we hit a recession. You know, it's our safety net if we hit a recession. It's not supposed to be because of poor planning.
Republican State Senator Barb Kirkmeyer thinks state Democrats have a spending problem that Washington's budget bill is simply enhancing.
It's not like we didn't know what Trump's promises were in his campaign.
As you might expect, the solution to being $1 billion short depends on your political party. Kirkmeyer, the Republican, thinks the state should simply cut.
Now, the governor has every ability to stop spending. He could do a hiring freeze right now, for example. He could tell departments, look, you need to look at, we've just started this fiscal year, you need to look at where you can make cuts specifically.
Ferrandino, a Democratic appointee, suggested some piggy bank money, perhaps some cuts to programs that avoided cuts earlier in the year, and doing what Congress and Trump did in reverse. Change state tax deductions for corporations to bring in more money.
Does it make sense to give tax credits to special interests?
Boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. So once again, we got to talk about another story that is a cautionary tale of what happens when you let progressive governance get out of control. However, in this situation, the good thing is that Colorado, despite being a blue state that should not be a blue state, they do have some guardrails in place through the Taxpayer Bill of Rights that is basically stopping Democrats from their tax and spend policies that they like to implement instead of actually doing the responsible thing and balancing a budget. In fact, the idea of balancing a budget brings Democrats to tears, which is exactly why we got to react to this video of Democrats in Colorado on the verge of tears over having to balance the budget, okay? Because Colorado is facing a $1.2 billion budget shortfall, and they don't have any money to pay their bills. Now, what are the reasons behind this? Well, of course, Democrats are blaming Trump. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But it's because, again, Democrats in this state have been spending money on things that they should not be spending money on. Like, for example, $200+ million on illegal immigrants, right? When Texas was sending their illegals to Colorado, yeah, they spent hundreds of millions housing illegals. They spent hundreds of millions sending the kids of illegals to schools. Yeah, they've spent hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars on their liberal pet projects. And now when it comes time to balance a budget, right, to say, hey, you know what, you can't spend anymore, right? You also can't tax anymore, right? You got to actually balance the budget. Now, again, they're on the verge of tears, right? It's almost as if Democrats hate a budget, right? And I think stories like this is exactly what I'm talking about. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this.
The Colorado lawmakers are trying to find solutions for another $1 billion budget shortfall this year.
The shortfall comes amid sweeping cuts to many programs due to President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill. Denver 7's Brandon Richard is getting answers on how lawmakers plan to address these budget problems.
For the second time this year, Colorado is facing a massive budget crisis. State budget officials released new projections Wednesday showing the current budget is suddenly more than $1 billion in the red.
Now, we don't have the cash
to pay our bills.
In a special legislative hearing streamed online and in person, State Budget Director Mark Ferrandino walked lawmakers through the problem.
We are talking about a budget and a revenue shortfall equivalent or greater than what we saw during the Great Recession.
Some lawmakers were left shell-shocked and worried for Coloradans struggling to make it.
They are about to get whacked in a way that I don't think they really understand.
Colorado's constitution requires the state budget be balanced. Lawmakers say that's going to require them to make painful cuts to programs people depend on.
It is going to be hard, and there will be cuts. There's no way we're doing this without cutting programs.
Democrats blame President Trump's so-called Big Beautiful Bill. They say because of tax changes it makes, the state is collecting less revenue than lawmakers were expecting when they passed the budget in May.
Now, let me tell you why this is BS, okay? Trying to blame Trump. First and foremost, they should have known that the bill was going to pass, right? When you passed a budget, you should have known and expected that the Trump administration would cut taxes, okay? Which means that people's taxable incomes, the amount of money that is subject to tax, would decline, right? It would decrease, okay? And this matters for state budgets because of the fact that a lot of states base the taxable income in that state based off your federal tax returns, right? How much did you owe the federal government? And they use that calculation in order to determine how much you owe the state, right? So, you know, if you're paying less taxes at the federal level, it's also likely you're going to be paying less taxes at the state level because you're able to write off more things at the federal level, which again lowers your overall taxable income, okay? So that's how the state is affected by that. And they should have known that, right? This is why you should leave yourself some wiggle room, right? When you make a budget, you should leave yourself wiggle room for situations like this that come up so that, you know, you don't have to dip into the piggy bank or you don't have to, you know, panic and try to figure out, okay, well, how are we going to fund this? How are we going to fund that? Because ultimately, in the day, you didn't use up all your money, right? You didn't spend everything that you have, okay? Or all the money that you bring in, okay? You saved a little bit. So, you know, again, it's funny how they're trying to blame Trump, but it's not a bad thing that people are paying less in taxes, right? It's not a bad thing. Okay, if people are paying less in taxes, then that means they can keep more of their own money. If they can keep more of their own money, that means they need less government assistance, right? There's more incentive for them to work, which means they will need less government assistance. And at that point, it's okay for you to cut government assistance for people who are incentivized to work, right? I mean, I don't understand why this is so complicated. Why is this so hard for Democrats to understand and for them to grasp?
It feels like a crazy wrong direction, and it feels like a thing that didn't need to happen.
But Republicans pushed back on that narrative, calling the hearing extremely partisan. They blame years of overspending by Democrats.
The state's been in an identified structural deficit for several years where spending, we can't keep up with the level of spending that we've created here in the General Assembly.
And that's something we heard many people mention in the past. So I asked State Senator Judy Amable, a Democratic member of the Joint Budget Committee.
Does Colorado have a spending problem? Do you all spend too much as lawmakers?
You know, I find that kind of laughable. We cannot raise taxes in Colorado without asking the voters. We have to balance our budget every year. We are not able to have a spending problem because we have all of these constraints on our ability to tax and spend.
Constraints on their ability to tax and spend. Again, is it any wonder why this Democrat is damn near in tears over this, right? When Democrats have to think of solutions outside of let's tax and spend more, right? That really bothers them, okay? Because they don't know how to come up with any other solution outside of that. This lady is basically saying that, well, because the voters decided that in order to raise taxes, you actually have to ask the voters first. You have to get permission from the voters before you decide to take more of their money, right? Because of that, she sees that as a constraint. Well, we're constrained. We can't tax and spend more. And this is going to be terrible, right? And it's like, no, this is not terrible. This is actually working the way it's designed to work, right? The way that the system in Colorado is designed to work is so that you don't tax and spend endlessly, that you have to make the tough decisions. That's what your job is as a politician. But see, Democrats have figured out the game here, which is that if you just, take from people who work and you get to people who don't work, okay, then that's an easy way to get votes, right? And when they can't do that, it makes it harder for them to get support, to get votes, to win elections, to govern. Democrats do not know how to govern or win elections outside of promising free stuff, outside of promising to take somebody else's money, a working person's money, and to give it to people who don't want to work, right? That is the only thing Democrats know how to do. And when they can't do that, again, look how they panic, right? Look how they panic. Republicans are not panicking, right? Look at the difference between the Republican response and the Democrat response. Democrats are like, oh God, we can't tax and spend. Republicans are like, well, I guess we got to cut. I guess we got to cut. We got to make some hard decisions, right? Yeah. I just want you guys to notice how both parties are reacting to this problem. It tells you everything you need to know about what's wrong with our current modern politics.
All right, Brandon Richard joins us live in the newsroom now. And Brandon, given this dire budget picture, there may be a special session called to address the shortfall.
Yeah, that's right, Shannon. The governor is considering calling a special session, possibly for late August. Many lawmakers are expecting that, and if he does, it'll be the third year in a row Governor Polis has called a special session, and the fourth one he's called since he took office in 2019.
Yeah, so again, let's learn a little bit more about the tax system and why Democrats are so upset about being constrained in regards to what they can do, right? Having to balance this budget.
Our Marshall Zellinger explains.
Colorado went from expecting to refund $289 million in TABOR dollars to having to cut $783 million. Who's to blame? In April, state lawmakers passed a budget that started in July and had the revenue and expenses even. Then, at the start of July, the Republican-led Congress made tax policy changes that President Trump signed into law that will drop the revenue coming into the state. So now the state has to do a combination of cutting expenses, finding new revenue, or using the piggy bank. That's what the special session is about. However, there's already a problem in next year's budget that starts next July. That budget is already expected to be $532 million short, and the warnings existed before the Republicans in Congress passed a new budget bill, like when state lawmakers debated the current budget in April.
You know, I think next year we're really heading for a big wreck.
We better do more than rip off the Band-Aid, because otherwise next year we're going to need a tourniquet to stop the bleeding.
I appreciate that sentiment, and I do think we will be in a world of hurt next year.
The fat is trimmed. I imagine that we will see worse cuts next year. Next year, it's going to be things that really, really, really upset people because there won't be any fat.
Next
Well,
year,
see, again, listen, what you see there, they knew, right? They all knew what was coming, right? They knew this was coming. So this guy says, well, there's no fat that can be trimmed. No. There's fat that can be trimmed. Because, again, if you're getting less tax dollars because people aren't paying as much money in taxes to the government, aka people are keeping more of their own money, first and foremost, that creates more economic activity, which means that they're probably not going to lose as much revenue as they think, because they're going to make up for it, given the fact that there's going to be more GDP output, right? More economic output, more tax revenue, overall tax revenue, despite the tax cut. So it's not guaranteed they're going to lose as much as they think they're going to lose. But also on top of that, again, if people keep more of their own money, that's less government programs that you need, which means that because people are now keeping their own money, right, that's more fat. Okay, that can be trimmed because you don't need that anymore. Now, that spending that you were doing, that doesn't mean that you keep doing that spending because people are keeping more of their own money. No. You also have to decrease spending because people don't need that government assistance anymore, right? People don't need to be paying for all of these programs. Therefore, it is now okay to cut spending, right? People don't need it anymore. So when you have tax cuts, that means that there's more fat that can be cut from spending. Because again, the whole point of the tax cut is to incentivize people to work, to not have to live off the government or rely on government programs. That's the whole point, okay? So again, just notice the difference in the mentality. Just notice how these people freak out about having to do the responsible thing, the hard thing in politics. The hard thing in politics.
Here, the state starts $532 million short if everything costs the same next year as it does this year. But that's not how budgets work. When you account for Medicaid increases, higher education costs, employees' salaries going up, and building maintenance, the state is projected to be $1.4 billion short. And because of TABOR, Colorado can only keep and spend so much each year. So if costs go up faster than the TABOR limit, cuts have to happen. Then it becomes a state policy problem. What should be funded and what programs should be cut? Colorado lawmakers already knew before Congress acted that next year was rough, and the state was already projected to spend as much as it could, plus refund money back through TABOR next year. So it becomes a spending question. Does the state spend too much, Republican viewpoint, or is TABOR too limiting, Democratic viewpoint?
And at some point, they have to stop fighting with each other about it and actually come up with the cuts. What are most likely?
Well, that list I just showed, I don't think you're really going to do much with the Medicaid spending, but employee salaries, I hate to say it, you might be limiting there. Maintenance, you're probably not going to spend $200 million on building maintenance next year. That's money that's going to be held back. So, but you got to find a lot of that.
All right, Marshall Zellinger, thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, when it comes to Medicaid, you can start by getting illegals off the Medicaid,
$1 billion
right? Getting illegals off the system, okay? Stop taking care of illegals. Take care of American citizens. Again, with these tax cuts, you're not going to need as many people on the government, right? You're not going to need as much government assistance. There's plenty of things they can cut. They can get a Doge team up in there, right, to cut some of this stuff. I'm sure they can find stuff to cut. Cut some salaries, right, of some of these politicians, okay, of some of these highly paid government officials. Cut their salaries. There's plenty of places they can cut. You know, again, the government makes all type of excuses, right? But again, my viewpoint is this. Again, if people are paying less taxes, that means that's less money that the government needs to be spending, period, right? When you cut taxes, you cut spending too, okay? Taxes were cut, and if you expect revenues to go down, then you need to cut spending. But Democrats, they see it as, no, well, we need to spend more, right? We are constrained. We need to be able to take more of your money, right? And Republicans are like, no, we just need to spend less. Again, notice the difference. That is the difference between the ideologies. And, that's why people say, well, it doesn't really matter. Voting Republican, Democrat, they're all the same. No, they're actually not the same, right? Especially at the state and local level. Maybe at the federal level, that might be more true, right? But at the state and local level, it actually really does matter. It matters a lot, okay? So I hope you guys can see the difference between the two and how they approach this problem, because I think this is a great example of the difference between a Democrat and Republican, especially when you talk about budgeting and fiscal responsibility at the state and local level. But let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.